When my Ford Fiesta lease car went in for a service, they sent us this Ford Car Plus. And I thought it'd be a good opportunity to do a road test because this is an important model. It shifts the car from being a small city car into an entry-level car to take on the likes of the Vauxhall Viva. So how does it fare? Well, one thing I noticed, it's a little bit easier to get in and out of than the Fiesta. The seats seem to be just that little bit higher. Makes all the difference in the world for an old sod like me. And there's a little bit less of the old, when I'm getting in and out. So for someone who's starting to feel those little aches and pains, it's probably, just from a practical point of view, slightly better than the Fiesta. But the question is, has the cost cutting on the build of the car translated to a loss over the Fiesta on the road? Let's find out. Well, the engine dates back to the Yamaha built unit that was in the Ford Puma and the Fiesta. Now, it was a beautiful engine, got a lot of praise at the time, sweet and powerful enough. This is not built by Yamaha, it's a development, and it's lost a little bit of the sweetness that it used to have, but it still pulls willingly enough. It seems to lack a little bit of torque for accelerating in fifth gear on the motorway, but around town it's peppy enough. Head out on the motorway as I'm about to do now, and get going, get going, get going. It doesn't have the torque, which is fine. Just don't expect to get anywhere in a hurry, and don't go trying to race anybody. It's not that sort of unit. The sound deadening seems to be a little bit less, so you get a lot more tyre roar than you get in the Fiesta. A little bit more noise. The engine's quite muted, but you can hear it's quite busy, working quite hard. So how does this fit into the Ford family? Well, the original car, depending on how you want to pronounce it, was a city car based on the Mark IV Fiesta being shortened. It also created or introduced a new design language along with the Focus called New Edge Design. It was a real emperor's clothes job. Basically what they did was they got a blob, like everyone else's blob, stuck some geometric shapes on and called it a new design language. Personally, I thought it was ugly. The Mark I looked like an overweight baby from behind with an oversized nappy on. But people seemed to like it, and it did well, and it sold for years. So to follow that up, they had a bit of a head scratch, and the current car, or the old one that's just been replaced, was actually based on the same chassis as the Fiat 500, which was based on the Fiat Panda. Now, how did Ford get involved with Fiat? Well, Fiat was supposed to be becoming partners with GM a few years back. That's why the Punto and the Corsa shared the same chassis. You can see it in the window line. That deal fell through, and Fiat were looking for a partner to share the chassis, share the costs. Ford were looking for a replacement for the car, so it seemed to make sense to join up for that particular model. Ford were very happy with the chassis they got, and the second generation of car came about. So if you look at the window line, you can see there's a little bit of Fiat 500 in the previous Ford car. This is the third generation, and what they've decided to do is move away from the city car thing. They've moved on to basically an introduction. The new Ford Fiesta is going to be based on the current Ford Fiesta chassis, as is this. In this case, it's slightly shortened, and they've built the car in India, and the idea is to make a cheaper entry-level car that's just below the Fiesta, and the new Fiesta will be just above the current Fiesta in terms of pricing and marketplace. Now that makes a certain amount of sense, because the current Fiesta has been fantastic. It's by a long way Ford's best-selling car in Europe. It's easily Ford's best-selling car in Britain. It's still the class leader after all these years in terms of ride and handling. It still looks good. It still looks new. For me, it's the best Fiesta they've ever produced. Kind of hard act to follow. So they're not going to try. What they're going to do is replace it with effectively two cars. This is going to be your entry level. This is your introduction to Ford, and it fits the market where way back the old Ford Popular used to be, or the original Mark I Escort. It is your cheap entry level to Ford ownership. So it's more about price than size. It's still quite a big car in the Fiesta, and like a small Fiesta. So how can you tell the differences? Well, if you're sitting in here, the layout is well designed, and it looks very familiar to anyone who's driven a Fiesta. Even the steering wheel looks very Fiesta, and that's no bad thing. The Fiesta is a nice car. That's where you're going to spot the difference. Cheap plastics, lots of them. Anyone who's owned a Peugeot 206 will know exactly what I'm talking about. And yet, it's not a bad thing. If you can live with the harder plastics, you'll be perfectly happy with this. So, what's it like on the inside? Well, as I mentioned earlier, hard plastics, but it's nicely laid out. Anyone familiar with a Ford Fiesta will find it all looking pretty familiar. Everything's in the same sort of place. Plenty of headroom. You are sitting slightly higher, but that makes it easier for an old git like me to get in and out. With the front seat set up for me, in the back it's a bit of a squash. The front seats are sculpted to allow your knees a bit of room, but I'm sure I'd feel it if I was sitting in the front. Plenty of foot space because the seat's a bit higher, and it does seem a bit more airy back here than in the Fiesta. But other than that, plenty of room above your head, and yeah, apart from the leg room, not too bad. The boot opens with 2 clicks of the key fob. It's not as deep lengthways as the Fiesta, but depth is plenty, and there's enough there for a shopping trip. The back seats do fold down at the press of a button to create a bit more space. Little details, well, I know it's summer, but it is absolutely hacking down outside, or has been, and I had the heater on earlier. It is melt your face off good, which is exactly what you want in the middle of winter. So the heater gets a big thumbs up. All the controls are dead easy. I mean, that's what I like about entry-level cars. Some cars have just got too complicated for their own good, with big screens and everything controlled by touchscreen and everything. How you're supposed to concentrate on the old-fashioned idea of just driving, I don't know. But this has got a really good heater. It's got a really simple stereo. It does everything well, you know what I mean? If you're just looking for a nice, reliable car to drive around town, it's not a bad thing at all.